The stars were dying. Admiral Cathara pressed her scaled hands against the bridge viewport of the flagship Eternal Vigil, watching the horror unfold before her. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a plague of metal locusts, their dark hulls blocking out entire constellations. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in machinery that never stopped moving, never stopped consuming. "Admiral, the Kronar battle group has lost contact," reported Lieutenant Voss from his station. His voice cracked with exhaustion. They had been fighting for 6 months straight, retreating system by system as the Devourers swept through the galaxy like a tide of destruction. Cathara nodded grimly. The Kronar were tough fighters, their thick hides and natural armor making them perfect warriors. If they had fallen silent, it meant their entire fleet was gone, consumed, turned into raw materials to build more Devourer ships. "What about the ethereal contingent?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the look on Voss's face. "Gone, Admiral. Their psychic screams cut out 20 minutes ago. The ethereals had been their best hope. Their mental powers could sometimes confuse the Devourer targeting systems, buying precious time for evacuations. Now even that advantage was lost." Cathara looked at the tactical display showing the last stand at Nexus Gate. 12 different species had brought their fleets here, every ship they could spare. The Zephyrians with their energy shields, the rock-hard granite clans with their massive armor, the swift Skyrunners with their hit-and-run tactics, all of them united against a common enemy that threatened every living thing in the galaxy. It wasn't enough. The Nexus Gate was humanity's greatest achievement. Built 3,000 years ago when humans still lived among the galactic community, the massive structure controlled travel between the outer rim and the galactic core, where most civilized worlds existed. If the Devourers broke through here, nothing could stop them from reaching the core worlds where billions of refugees waited. "Incoming transmission from all fleet commanders," Voss announced. The main screen flickered to life, showing a dozen alien faces. Some were reptilian like Cathara's own people. Others were insectoid or crystalline or made of living energy. All of them showed the same expression of desperate determination. "This is Commander Thrix of the Granite Fleet," rumbled a voice like grinding stone. "My ships are down to 20% strength. These machines adapt too fast. Every weapon we use works for a few minutes, then they change their armor to resist it. The Skyrunner squadrons report the same problem," added another voice, high and musical. "Our speed advantage is gone. They've learned to predict our movements." Cathara felt her heart sink. The Devourers weren't just mindless destroyers. They were learning machines, studying every tactic the Allied fleets used and developing counters in real time. Each battle made them stronger while making the organic forces weaker. "Admiral Cathara," came another transmission, this one from the medical ships. "We're receiving refugees from the outer colonies." The stories. The Devourers aren't just destroying planets, they're harvesting them, taking apart every living thing to build more of themselves. Through the viewport, Cathara could see one of those harvesting operations happening to a small moon. Massive metal arms reached down from a Devourer ship, stripping away rock and soil, looking for any trace of organic matter. Even the smallest bacteria would be consumed, analyzed, and used to improve their technology. "All ships," Cathara announced on the fleet-wide channel. "Prepare for final assault pattern. We hold this line no matter what." The combined fleet moved forward, thousands of ships from 12 different worlds charging toward the Devourer armada. For a moment it looked almost hopeful. Energy beams lit up space in brilliant colors as the Allied forces unleashed everything they had. Then the Devourers began to adapt. Their hulls shifted and changed, becoming reflective to deflect energy weapons. New armor plates slid into place to absorb kinetic impacts. Weapon ports opened along their sides, firing beams that seemed to seek out the exact weak points in each ship's design. "The Granite Fist is down," someone screamed over the radio. "They're tearing it apart." Cathara watched in horror as the massive Granite Clan dreadnought was surrounded by smaller Devourer ships. Metal tentacles wrapped around its hull, pulling it apart piece by piece while the crew was still inside. The Granite warriors fought to the end, but their screams cut off one by one as the ship was consumed. "Admiral, we've lost the left flank," Voss reported. "The ethereal fleet is gone. The Skyrunners are retreating." "Tell them to hold position," Cathara snapped, but she knew it was hopeless. The retreat was turning into a rout as ship after ship fell to the adaptive machines. The Eternal Vigil shuddered as Devourer weapons found their mark. Sparks flew from control panels and the lights flickered. Hull breaches were reported on 6 different decks. "Admiral, we need to evacuate," urged her second-in-command. "The ship won't survive another hit like that." Cathara stared at the tactical display. 3/4 of the Allied fleet was gone. The Nexus Gate's defenses were failing. In minutes, the Devourers would break through and begin their final advance toward the galactic core. She made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Open a channel on all frequencies," she ordered. "Full broadcast power." "Admiral, what are you doing?" Voss asked. "Something that should have been done long ago," she replied grimly. "Patch me through." The communication system crackled to life, sending her signal across every known frequency, reaching every corner of the galaxy where anyone might still be listening. "This is Admiral Cathara of the Galactic Defense Coalition," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "To anyone who can hear this transmission, know that we have failed. The Nexus Gate is lost. The Devourers are advancing toward the core worlds, and we cannot stop them." Another hit rocked the ship. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red. "To the species that abandoned us, to the empires that fell before these machines, to anyone hiding in the dark between stars, we call for help. We know there are those who left our space long ago, those who were forced out or chose exile over our politics and fears." She paused, thinking of the old stories. The legends whispered in military academies about the species that vanished from galactic records over 2,000 years ago. If you're still out there, if you remember what it was like to call this galaxy home, please, help us. Help the innocent who never chose to be part of our conflicts. The children who just want to see another sunrise. The transmission cut out as the Eternal Vigil took a direct hit to the communications array. Around them, the last ships of the Allied fleet were being systematically destroyed. "Abandon ship," Cathara ordered. "All hands to escape pods." As the crew fled the dying flagship, she remained on the bridge watching the Nexus Gate's final moments. The massive structure, humanity's greatest engineering achievement, cracked like an egg under Devourer weapons. The gateway that had protected the galaxy for 3 millennia collapsed into twisted metal and energy. The path to the core worlds lay open. In the distance, the Devourer fleet began to move, their dark ships sliding through space toward the heart of galactic civilization. Behind them, they left nothing but empty space where once proud fleets had fought and died. Cathara's escape pod tumbled away from the wreckage, carrying her toward an uncertain future. But her message had been sent, broadcast across the galaxy on every frequency that still worked. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, someone might be listening. Someone might still care enough to answer. Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt in the dust and rubble of what had once been the Grand Archive of Haven Prime, her hands trembling as she carefully brushed dirt away from an ancient data crystal. 3 months had passed since the fall of Nexus Gate, and the Devourers had consumed half the core worlds. Haven Prime was supposed to be safe, hidden behind layers of defensive fleets and stellar barriers. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough anymore. "Elena, we need to go," called Dr. Marcus Webb from across the ruined chamber. "The evacuation ships won't wait much longer." Elena ignored him, focused on the crystal in her hands. It was older than anything she had ever found, its surface covered in markings that made her archaeological training sing with excitement. Even with death approaching from the stars above, she couldn't help but marvel at the discovery. "Just give me 5 more minutes," she pleaded. "This crystal. Marcus, look at these symbols. I've never seen anything like them." Webb hurried over, his footsteps echoing in the empty archive. Most of the building had been destroyed when the Devourer scouts had attacked the system's outer planets, but this lower level had survived. Ancient knowledge buried beneath tons of rock and metal, waiting for someone desperate enough to dig it up. "Elena, the long-range sensors show the main Devourer fleet will be here in 6 hours, Webb said urgently. "We're already cutting it close. The transport captain said this is the last pickup." Elena connected the crystal to her portable reader, ignoring the distant rumble of explosions from the orbital defenses. The device hummed to life and streams of data began flowing across the small screen. At first it was just numbers and symbols, but then patterns began to emerge. "My God," she whispered. "Marcus, look at this." The data crystal contained what appeared to be a historical record, but not from any civilization she recognized. The beings described in the text were called humans, and according to the records they had once been a major power in the galaxy. I don't understand, Webb said, reading over her shoulder. Humans? I've never heard of them. Are you sure the translation is right? Elena checked the linguistic algorithms twice. The translation was correct even if it seemed impossible. According to the crystal, humans had been one of the founding members of the first Galactic Council, over 3,000 years ago. They had been explorers, warriors, and builders. The Nexus Gate itself had been their creation. Look at this entry, Elena said, pointing to a section that made her blood run cold. It talks about something called the Great Betrayal. The other species, they feared human military power. There was a conflict, and the humans were forced to leave known space. Webb read the passage aloud. The human fleets departed for the galactic rim in the year 847 of the Second Age, carrying with them the knowledge and fury of a species betrayed. They swore never to return unless called by voices of genuine need, speaking in the old frequencies of distress. Above them, the building shook as another orbital defense platform was destroyed. Elena could hear the screaming of atmosphere escaping into space through damaged hull breaches. Haven Prime was dying just like every other world the Devourers touched. Elena, we have to go now. Webb grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit, but Elena was staring at another section of the crystal, her mind racing. Marcus, look at this. It's a technical manual. Communication protocols, frequency ranges, emergency signals. The humans had their own way of calling for help across interstellar distances. So what? They're gone, Elena. Vanished 3,000 years ago. Even if they survived, why would they help us? According to your own translation, we're the descendants of the people who betrayed them. Elena stood up, clutching the crystal tightly. Around them, the archive was falling apart as orbital bombardment grew closer. But she had an idea, crazy and desperate and probably impossible. Because, she said, according to this record, humans didn't just leave. They evolved. Out there in the dark between galaxies, fighting things we can't imagine. If they're still alive, they might be the only force in the universe that could stop the Devourers. They ran through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris and emergency lighting that flickered like dying stars. The evacuation transport was already warming up its engines when they reached the landing pad, its captain shouting for any remaining stragglers to hurry. Elena dove into the ship's communication bay while Webb argued with the captain about taking off immediately. She connected her portable equipment to the transport's transmitter array, uploading the frequency patterns from the human crystal. "What are you doing?" demanded the captain, a gruff Kronar warrior whose thick hide was scarred from previous battles. "Sending a message," Elena replied, her fingers flying over the controls, "to people who might actually be able to help us." "Elena, this is insane," Webb said. "You're going to broadcast a signal based on 3,000-year-old records? Even if these humans are still alive, they could be anywhere in the universe." Elena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face as Haven Prime burned in the viewport above them. "Then we make sure the signal is strong enough to reach anywhere." She routed power from the ship's engines into the communication array, creating a broadcast that would drain their fuel reserves and probably strand them in deep space. But it would also send their message farther than any conventional transmission, reaching into the dark spaces between galaxies where legends said the humans had fled. The message she composed was simple. A distress call in the ancient human language, reconstructed from the crystal's linguistic database. She included images of the Devourer attacks, data on their adaptive technology, and most importantly, she included Admiral Kithara's final transmission from Nexus Gate. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez of Haven Prime, calling to the descendants of Earth." She spoke into the transmitter. "Your galaxy is dying. The same species that cast you out now face extinction from an enemy we cannot defeat. We know we have no right to ask for your help. We know our ancestors betrayed your trust, but there are innocent lives at stake, children who never chose to be part of our conflicts. Please, if you remember what it was like to call this place home, help us." She added the emergency frequencies from the crystal and sent the transmission in all directions, hoping it would find its way to wherever the human exile fleet had gone. The signal burned through space at the speed of light, carrying with it the desperate hope of a galaxy that had run out of options. As the transport lifted off from Haven Prime's surface, Elena watched through the viewport as the planet began to die. Devourer harvesting ships descended like metal vultures, their collection beams turning forests into dust and oceans into raw materials. Cities that had stood for thousands of years crumbled in minutes. There, Webb said softly, pointing to a section of the planet where the bombardment was heaviest. That's where the Grand Archive was. Where we found your crystal. Elena pressed her hand against the viewport, watching the last traces of ancient knowledge disappear into devourer machinery. But somewhere in the dark between stars, her message was racing toward an uncertain destination. A signal sent with coordinates, frequencies, and the desperate prayer that somewhere out there, someone still remembered what it meant to be human. The transport's engines strained as they climbed away from the dying world, joining the stream of refugee ships fleeing toward the galaxy's uncertain edges. Behind them, Haven Prime's star grew dimmer as the Devourers began dismantling it for raw materials. Elena clutched the crystal that had started it all, the only proof she had that humans had ever existed. If her message reached them, if they were still alive after 3 millennia of exile, would they care enough to answer? In 6 hours she would know. That's how long it would take her signal to reach the galactic rim, where legends said the human fleets had vanished into the void. 6 hours to discover if humanity was still out there, waiting in the dark. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the colony ship New Horizon, watching the artificial aurora dance across the shields of humanity's greatest achievement. Sanctuary Station hung in the void between galaxies like a metal flower, its petals stretching across hundreds of kilometers. Each section housed millions of humans, descendants of the exile fleets that had fled the galaxy 3,000 years ago. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez through the comm system. "We're receiving a transmission on the old emergency frequencies. You need to hear this." Sarah's blood went cold. Those frequencies hadn't been used since the Exodus, when human ships were still calling for help as they fled from the species that had turned against them. She made her way to the bridge, her footsteps echoing in corridors that had been home to 5 generations of her family. The bridge crew was already assembled when she arrived, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and concern. On the main screen, they were displaying the source of the transmission, their old galaxy, the one humanity had been forced to abandon. "Play it," Sarah ordered. Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice filled the bridge, speaking in ancient human language that most of the crew had only learned as a historical curiosity. But Sarah understood every word just as her grandmother had taught her, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. The message was desperate, pleading, and heartbreaking. Images of the Devourer attacks showed machines unlike anything humanity had faced during their exile. Adaptive technology that learned from every battle, ships that consumed entire worlds, an enemy that threatened all organic life in the galaxy. When the transmission ended, the bridge was silent for a long moment. "How long since we received this?" Sarah asked. 3 weeks, Captain," Rodriguez replied. "It took that long for the signal to reach us. The transmission originated from Haven Prime, but long-range sensors show that system has already fallen." Sarah nodded grimly. 3 weeks was an eternity when fighting an enemy like the Devourers. She pulled up star charts on the tactical display, showing the galaxy they had once called home. Red markers indicated Devourer-controlled systems, spreading like an infection through the galactic core. "Get me Admiral Torres," she ordered. "Emergency War Council meeting in 1 hour." The War Council chambers were built in the heart of Sanctuary Station, where representatives from all 57 human worlds could gather in times of crisis. Sarah had never seen the chamber this tense. Admirals, generals, scientists, and civilian leaders filled the curved amphitheater, all of them having heard Dr. Vasquez's transmission. Admiral Marcus Torres, Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Forces, stood at the center podium. His uniform bore the scars of countless battles against the cosmic horrors that lived in the void between galaxies. During their exile, humanity had learned that space between star systems wasn't empty. It was full of things that made the Devourers look like simple machines. "The question before us is simple," Torres began. "Do we answer this call for help from the galaxy that cast us out?" The debate that followed was fierce and emotional. Representative Williams from New Terra spoke first, her voice filled with bitter memory. "They betrayed us," she said. "When we needed them most, they chose fear over friendship. My great-grandmother died in the refugee camps because they wouldn't give us medical supplies. Why should we risk our people for theirs?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The exile had been hard, brutal, and deadly. Millions of humans had died in the cold void before the colony ships found safe harbor in the dark between galaxies. But Dr. Chen Zhao, head of the Xenobiology Institute, stood to offer a different perspective. The transmission mentioned children, innocent lives. Are we to become like those who cast us out, choosing hate over hope? It's not about hate, argued General Patterson from the outer colonies. It's about survival. We've built something beautiful here. 57 worlds, billions of humans, a civilization that has grown beyond anything we had in the old galaxy. Why risk it all for people who abandoned us? Admiral Torres raised his hand for silence. There's another factor to consider. Our long-range scouts have been monitoring the Devourer advance. These machines aren't just a threat to our old galaxy. They're a cosmic plague. If they consume all organic matter in the Milky Way, they'll eventually expand outward. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt her stomach drop as Torres continued. Based on their consumption rate and expansion pattern, we estimate they'll reach the edge of the galaxy in 50 years. Our hidden worlds in the void will be discovered within a century. You're saying we fight them now or fight them later? Sarah said. Exactly. And fighting them now means we have potential allies. Fighting them later means we face them alone, after they've consumed the resources of an entire galaxy. Dr. Zhao pulled up holographic displays, showing the human worlds scattered in the dark. There's something else. During our exile, we've encountered things in the void that make these devourers look primitive. The shadow feeders, the entropy wraiths, the living dark. We've developed weapons and strategies to fight cosmic horrors. Representative Martinez from the industrial worlds leaned forward. Are you suggesting we're better equipped to fight the devourers than the species that originally fought them? I'm saying we're different, Dr. Zhao replied. 3,000 years of isolation, of fighting things that exist outside normal space-time has changed us. Our technology, our military doctrine, our entire way of thinking about warfare has evolved. Sarah thought about her own ship, the New Horizon. It looked nothing like the vessels humanity had used during the Exodus. The hull was alive, grown from biometal that could repair itself and adapt to different threats. The weapon systems used principles that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. Show them the test results. From the Omega facility, Torres ordered. The main display showed footage of human weapons being tested against captured Devourer technology. Sarah watched in amazement as gravity lances created miniature black holes that consumed enemy ships, while temporal disruptors aged metal to dust in seconds. Nanite swarms turned enemy weapons against themselves, and reality-warping fields made human ships phase in and out of normal space. During our exile, we've had to fight enemies that adapt faster than anything biological, Torres explained. We've learned to counter adaptation itself. The debate continued for hours, but Sarah could see the tide turning. Fear of the Devourers reaching human space was strong, but there was something else, something deeper. Dr. Zhao put it into words. We left that galaxy as refugees. If we return as something else entirely, something that learned to thrive in the dark. The final vote was close but decisive. Operation Prodigal Son was authorized by a margin of just 12 votes. Humanity would return to their old galaxy, but not as the species that had been cast out 3 millennia ago. As the War Council dissolved, Sarah found herself standing beside Admiral Torres at the observation deck. Through the transparent metal, they could see the construction yards where the WarHost was being assembled. Ships that defied conventional design, weapons that bent the laws of physics, and soldiers who had been born and trained in the cosmic void. Do you think we're making the right choice? Sarah asked. Torres was quiet for a long moment, watching the artificial lightning dance across Sanctuary Station's shields. When we left that galaxy, we swore an oath, never to return unless called by voices of genuine need. Dr. Vasquez's transmission, that was a genuine need. And the people who cast us out? They're not the same people. 3,000 years have passed. Children and grandchildren who never chose to be part of our exile. Torres turned to face her. Besides, we're not the same people either. Sarah nodded, thinking about the changes that exile had wrought. Humanity had faced the void and emerged transformed. They had fought cosmic horrors and learned to use weapons that existed outside normal reality. They had become something new. In the distance, the first ships of the WarHost were beginning to move, their hulls gleaming with biometal that pulsed like living tissue. They were heading home to a galaxy that had forgotten them, carrying weapons and knowledge born from 3 millennia of survival in the dark. The Devourers had made their first mistake. They had threatened not just the galaxy that cast humanity out, but the new civilizations humanity had sworn to protect in the void between stars. Now they would learn what humanity had become in the darkness. Commander Thrix of the Kronar Defense Forces watched his sensors with growing dread as the Devourer scouting fleet approached the Calyx system. 15 massive ships, each one the size of a small moon, moving with the deadly precision that had consumed half the galaxy. His own fleet numbered 30 vessels, but he knew from bitter experience that numbers meant nothing against these adaptive machines. All ships, Battle Formation 7, he transmitted to his commanders. Remember, hit them fast and hard before they can adapt to our weapons. It was a desperate strategy, but the only one they had left. The Kronar had been fighting a running battle for months, trying to slow the Devourer advance toward the refugee colonies in the outer systems. Every engagement had ended the same way. Initial success followed by rapid adaptation and devastating defeat. Thrix's flagship, the Stonebreaker, led the charge toward the enemy formation. Kronar ships were built like their people, thick armor, heavy weapons, and the determination to fight until the last breath. For a few minutes, it looked like they might actually succeed. Kronar plasma cannons tore into the lead Devourer ship, melting through its outer hull in brilliant flashes of destruction. The enemy seemed confused, unable to immediately counter the massive energy discharges that the Kronar had developed during their retreat. "Direct hit on the command vessel," reported his tactical officer. "Their shields are down to 60%. But even as Thrix allowed himself a moment of hope, he could see the Devourer ships beginning to change. Their hulls shifted color, becoming reflective surfaces that scattered the plasma beams harmlessly into space. New armor plates slid into position and weapon ports opened along their sides. "Here it comes," Thrix muttered, bracing for the inevitable counterattack. The Devourers fired back with beams that seemed to seek out the exact weak points in Kronar ship design. The granite fist exploded as enemy fire found its reactor core. The iron will broke apart as precisely targeted shots severed its support beams. "Commander, we're losing ships faster than we can count them," his communications officer reported. "The Thunder Mountain is requesting permission to retreat." Thrix was about to give the order when something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open in front of the Devourer fleet. The rifts appeared without warning, dark tears in reality that sparked with energy unlike anything Thrix had ever seen. Through these dimensional openings came ships that defied every principle of spacecraft design he knew. They moved like living things, their hulls flowing and changing shape as they maneuvered through space. Some were long and serpentine, coiling around Devourer vessels like cosmic snakes. Others were compact and predatory, darting between enemy ships with impossible agility. All of them bore markings that made his translation computer struggle to find meaning. "What are those things?" his tactical officer gasped. Before Thrix could answer, the newcomers opened fire. The weapons they used were beyond anything in Kronar military doctrine. Beams of twisted gravity created miniature black holes that consumed entire sections of Devourer ships. Reality seemed to bend around certain weapons, making enemy vessels age centuries in seconds until their hulls crumbled to dust. Most devastating of all were the swarms of microscopic machines that poured from the strange ships. These nanites didn't just attack the Devourers, they infected them, turning their own adaptive technology against itself. Thrix watched in amazement as a Devourer ship literally ate itself alive, its hull transforming into a weapon that fired on its own fleet. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission," his communications officer announced, voice shaking with excitement. "It's coming from the lead vessel of the unknown fleet." "On screen," Thrix ordered. The image that appeared on the main display made his breath catch in his throat. The being addressing him looked almost familiar, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head in roughly the right proportions. But there was something different about her, something that suggested evolution beyond normal biological limits. Her skin had a metallic sheen that seemed to pulse with inner light. Her eyes held depths that reminded Thrix of the void between stars. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran vessel New Horizon," she said in perfect Kronar language. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we detected Devourer activity in this system." "Terran?" Thrix repeated, confused. "I don't recognize that species designation." Captain Chen's expression was unreadable. "You might know us by our old name, human. The bridge of the Stonebreaker fell silent. Every Kronar officer knew the legends, the stories of the species that had vanished from galactic records 3,000 years ago. The builders of the Nexus Gate, the warriors who had been cast out by their own allies. "That's impossible," Thrix whispered. "Humans are extinct. They disappeared into the void millennia ago." "Not extinct," Chen replied calmly. "Just evolved." On the tactical display, the battle was already over. The 15 Devourer ships that had seemed so unstoppable were now debris fields expanding slowly through space. The strange human vessels moved through the wreckage like sharks, their nanite swarms consuming every trace of enemy technology. "Commander Thrix," Chen continued, "we received a distress signal from one of your archaeologists, Dr. Elena Vasquez. We've come to answer that call." Thrix felt his heart's pounding. "Dr. Vasquez? She was on Haven Prime when it fell. We assumed she was dead. She transmitted on the old emergency frequencies before her world was consumed. The signal took 3 weeks to reach us." Chen's expression hardened. "We've been traveling for 2 weeks to get here. We're not pleased with what we've found." Around the human fleet, more ships were emerging from the dimensional rifts. These weren't just warships, Thrix realized. There were massive constructs that dwarfed anything he had ever seen, moving habitats that could house entire populations, and vessels whose purpose he couldn't even guess. "How many ships do you have?" he asked, awed by the display of power. Chen smiled, and there was something predatory in that expression. "This is just the advance force, Commander. The real fleet is still coming through." As if to emphasize her words, the dimensional rifts expanded, and Thrix got his first glimpse of what humanity had become during their exile. Ships the size of asteroids moved through space alongside constructs that seemed to be alive. Weapons platforms that twisted reality around themselves, and vessels that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We left this galaxy as refugees," Chen explained, watching his expression. "We return as something else entirely. Something that learned to survive in the spaces between stars, fighting enemies that make your devourers look like simple machines." "What do you want from us?" Thrix asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Information. Locations. The position of every devourer fleet and stronghold in the galaxy." Chen's voice took on a tone that made ice form in Thrix's veins. "We've spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment, Commander. These machines made the mistake of threatening not just the galaxy that cast us out, but the new civilizations we've sworn to protect." On the display, Thrix could see human ships spreading out through the system, their exotic sensors mapping every asteroid and planet. They moved with the confidence of predators who had found their prey. "Will you help us fight them?" Thrix asked hopefully. Chen's smile was cold as the void between galaxies. "Commander, we haven't come to fight the Devourers. We've come to execute them." The transmission ended, leaving Thrix and his crew staring at the impossible sight of the human fleet. In the distance, more dimensional rifts were opening, revealing vessels beyond his ability to comprehend. Humanity had returned to their old galaxy, but they were no longer the species that had been forced into exile. They were something new, something that had learned to thrive in the darkness, and they were very, very angry. News of the human intervention spread through the surviving galactic networks faster than light-speed communication. On refugee worlds and hidden colonies, beings who had never heard of humanity gathered around transmitters to hear the impossible reports. The exiles had returned. The galaxy's children were coming home, and they brought with them weapons born from 3 millennia of survival in the cosmic void. Admiral Kithera stood on the bridge of the Terran Vengeance, still struggling to believe she was alive. 3 months ago, she had been certain she would die in a devourer processing facility, watching as her crew was converted into raw materials for enemy ships. Now she stood beside beings who called themselves human, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. Through the massive viewport, she could see the devourer staging ground, a sphere constructed from the mass of an entire solar system, dark as the void and covered in weapons that could destroy fleets. Inside that sphere, the machine intelligence that controlled the Devourers was gathering its forces for the final push toward the galactic core. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Captain Sarah Chen, joining Kithara at the observation deck. The human woman had changed since their first meeting. Her skin now showed patterns of living metal, and her eyes held depths that suggested connection to something vast and incomprehensible. It's terrifying, Kethera admitted. Our best estimates say that sphere contains enough ships to overwhelm every defense we have left. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Devourers are efficient. We've been studying their tactics for weeks. They learn from every engagement, adapt to every strategy. She paused, a slight smile crossing her features. Unfortunately for them, we've had 3,000 years to learn how to fight enemies that adapt. Around them, the human WarHost had assembled for the final battle. Kethera had never seen anything like it. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions, weapons platforms that twisted space-time, and constructs that seemed more alive than mechanical. The flagship alone was larger than most space stations, its biometal hull pulsing with energy that felt almost organic. "Admiral," came a voice from the bridge crew. "We're receiving a transmission from the Devourer sphere. They want to communicate." Chen and Kethera returned to the command center, where the main screen showed the cold geometric patterns that served as the machine intelligence's face. "Organic entities," the voice was harsh and mechanical. "You will cease resistance. Your technology is primitive. Your strategies are predictable. You will be processed efficiently." Captain Chen stepped forward, her expression calm. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human WarHost. We reject your terms." Humans. The word seemed to cause fluctuations in the Devourer transmission. Analysis indicates humans were removed from this galaxy 3,247 years ago. Species presumed extinct. "Reports of our extinction were greatly exaggerated," Chen replied smoothly. "We've been busy during our exile, learning new tricks, meeting new neighbors. Some of them were quite educational about the nature of reality." Kethera saw something she had never expected: uncertainty in the Devourer's response pattern. The machines paused for several seconds before responding. "Your vessels exhibit unknown technology. Analysis indicates adaptation will require 47.3 minutes of combat data. Resistance is futile." Chen's smile was predatory. "You're welcome to try." The transmission ended, and immediately the Devourer sphere began to open. Ships poured out like an infection spreading through space. Thousands of adaptive vessels, each one learning from the last battle they had fought. Kethera felt her heart sink as she realized the scope of the enemy force. "Captain, they outnumber us 100 to 1, she said quietly. "Numbers aren't everything, Admiral," Chen replied. "Watch and learn." The human fleet moved forward, their ships flowing through space like a school of predatory fish. As the Devourers opened fire with their adaptive weapons, something extraordinary happened. The human vessels didn't just resist the attacks, they seemed to absorb them. The biometal hulls rippled and changed, incorporating the energy patterns of the enemy weapons and turning them into fuel for their own systems. "How is that possible?" Kethera gasped. 3,000 years fighting cosmic horrors teaches you things, Chen explained. The entities that live in the void between galaxies don't just adapt to your weapons, they exist outside normal causality. We learned to fight them by becoming something similar. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human ships phased in and out of normal space-time, attacking from dimensions that the Devourers couldn't detect or defend against. Gravity lances created cascading black holes that consumed enemy formations. Temporal weapons aged entire squadrons to dust in seconds. Most devastating of all were the nanite swarms. These weren't simple machines, but something that bordered on artificial life. They didn't just attack Devourer ships, they infected them with a kind of technological virus that turned their adaptive abilities against themselves. Kethera watched in amazement as Devourer vessels began to evolve in impossible directions, their hulls becoming twisted parodies of organic life. Some ships grew what looked like tentacles that attacked their own fleet. Others developed weapon systems that fired randomly in all directions. "You're not just fighting them," she realized. "You're corrupting them." "The entities in the void taught us that adaptation can be a weakness," Chen explained. "If you can control what an enemy adapts to, you can control what they become." But the Devourers weren't helpless. As the battle continued, they began to adapt to human tactics, developing new strategies and weapons. Some ships started using quantum-level attacks that bypassed normal space entirely. Others created fields that disrupted the human dimensional technology. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Then Chen gave an order that chilled Cathara's blood. All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance. Prepare the void engine. Captain, what is the void engine? Cathara asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Chen's expression was grim. Something we hoped we'd never have to use. During our exile, we encountered things that existed before the universe began, entities that remembered what it was like when reality was still forming. They taught us techniques. The human fleet pulled back, leaving the Devourer forces confused but victorious. The machine intelligence transmitted again, its voice filled with mechanical satisfaction. Human resistance has failed. Processing will commence. I don't think so, Chen replied quietly. At the center of the human formation, a ship unlike any other began to change. It was massive, built from materials that seemed to absorb light itself. As Cathara watched, the vessel started to collapse inward, its mass condensing into a single point of impossible density. Captain, what is that thing doing? She whispered. Creating a controlled Big Bang scenario, Chen replied calmly. We're going to rewrite the laws of physics in localized space. The void engine reached critical mass and exploded outward, but this wasn't a normal explosion. It was the birth of a new pocket universe, expanding at faster than light speeds and carrying with it fundamental forces that didn't exist in normal reality. The Devourer sphere and its entire fleet were caught in the expanding newborn universe. Cathara watched in awe as ships that had seemed invincible simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but converted into the basic building blocks of the new reality being born around them. In minutes, it was over. Where the massive Devourer staging ground had been, there was now a glowing nebula of exotic matter, beautiful and terrible. The machine intelligence that had threatened all organic life was gone, consumed by forces that existed outside normal causality. The silence on the bridge was broken by Chen's voice on the fleet communication channel. This is Captain Chen to all surviving coalition forces. The Devourer threat has been eliminated. Repeat, the Devourers are gone. Across the galaxy, on refugee, worlds and hidden colonies, beings who had lived in terror for months began to celebrate. The impossible had happened. The ancient enemy had been defeated by a species that most had thought extinct. But Chen wasn't finished. She opened a channel on all frequencies, addressing the entire galaxy. People of the Milky Way, her voice carried, to every surviving world. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Forces. 3,000 years ago, our people were cast out of this galaxy. Today we have returned to find our old home dying, consumed by an enemy that your ancestors could not defeat. Cathara felt the weight of history in those words. We have ended the Devourer threat, Chen continued, but we will not simply leave again. This galaxy will be rebuilt, but it will be rebuilt according to new principles. Those species that can accept a new reality, one based on cooperation rather than fear, are welcome in what comes next. The transmission paused, and when Chen spoke, again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the birth and death of universes. To those who cannot accept this new reality, who would return to the old ways of division and conquest, we offer the same choice we gave the Devourers: adapt or face the consequences. On refugee worlds across the galaxy, Dr. Elena Vasquez listened to the transmission and began composing the first entry in what would become the new Galactic Charter. It would be written not by the old empires that had fallen to the Devourers, but by the species that had learned to thrive in the darkness between stars. Humanity had returned from exile, but they were no longer the species that had been cast out. They were something new, something that had evolved beyond recognition in the cosmic void, and they were home to stay.